I heard of an easy way to make a pixel quilt top, and I've always wanted to try it ever since. As you can see, I finally did, and it worked great. So let me show you how to do it. The first step is to choose a pattern. I'm going with this Link sprite that is 16 by 28 pixels. It's best to pick something with a low amount of pixels, like a character from an NES game. I'll need 448 squares, which I'll make 6 by 6 centimeters each. The traditional way would be to cut the individual squares and sew those into rows. You then sew the rows together to make your quilt top. The hard part for me is to get all those seams to line up. A small deviation in one of your squares or your seam widths and it'll end up skewed. Normally I don't think that's too big of a deal, but for a pixel art quilt I want the lines to be as clean as possible. The technique I'm trying now makes the alignment much easier. It uses a big piece of Fusible interfacing as a base. I started by drawing a grid on it. The squares are the size of my pixels plus 3 centimeters of seam allowance, so 9 by 9 centimeters in my case. I recommend that you use a special pen that disappears when it gets wet to draw the grid. I didn't, and you'll see me regretting that later on. My interfacing isn't wide enough, so I iron 2 pieces together. Make sure you cover the adhesive side with oven paper when you do this, otherwise you're gonna get glue all over your iron or ironing board. Next, I'm cutting my fabric into strips that have the same width as the grid. This is a lot of work, but a good rotary cutter and a big cutting mat make it much faster. I drew squares onto the strips to make it easier to cut them to size and line them up with the grid later on. Now I can follow my pattern to iron the fabric strips onto the interfacing. Make sure to use that oven paper again, or things will get very sticky very soon. I'm lining everything up as good as I can, but some small gaps or overlaps are not going to matter, as long as they are within the seam allowance. I made several mistakes along the way, but that's okay. You can simply reheat the glue and take the fabric off again. Then you can replace it with the right color. To assemble the quilt, I folded it right sides together along a grid line and sewed along the fold with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. This way the whole seam gets sewn at once and everything will line up perfectly. This makes the whole process a lot more fun for me, since I'm not constantly worrying about making perfect stitch lines. Also, I don't have to deal with fraying edges. When the seams in one direction are sewn, press them all towards the same side. My quilt is looking a bit funky now, but that will change soon enough. Now I can stitch all the seams in the other direction. Making a pixel quilt is always going to be a lot of work, but this interfacing technique takes all the stress out of it for me, and it makes it quite relaxing. And there you go, a finished pixel quilt top. But then, disaster struck. The ink that I used to draw the grid started to bleed and it stained the fabric. Especially the numbers I wrote on the rows were causing big stains, so in a moment of panic I quickly removed those pieces of interfacing so that it wouldn't get worse. But of course there's a lot more ink lines, so I need a better solution. I took a break to think it through and then decided to try washing all of the ink out of the quilt and the interfacing. This meant risking getting stains all over the quilt and making it much worse, so I did a test run with some scraps to see if it would work. And it did. So I soaked the whole quilt in warm water, which quickly turned blue. After a few more baths like this, most of the ink was out and the stains were gone. What a relief. I dried the quilt off and left it to dry overnight. One more pass with the iron and my quilt top is finally done and stain free. So, lesson learned, next time use a disappearing marker. I'm very happy with how it came out. Some points are a little bit skewed, but most of them are really good. And it's definitely better than what I could have done using the traditional technique. If you're making a normal quilt, you can now combine your quilt top with a layer of batting and a backing fabric, and then you can quilt those together. However, I have something a bit different in mind for this one, but that will still be a lot of work, so I'm saving that for another video. As always, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.